I think yes.
Yeah.
We got 100 people.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Ms. Henderson, Mr. Walkinshaw is here as well. We have other members here, so it's noon, and I'll turn it over to you. We can get started.
All right. Thank you, Conti, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christina Henderson. I'm chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I'm calling this November 20th, 2024 meeting of the TPB to order. I'm so sorry I'm not able to join you all who are there in person, but I trust that you're able to see and hear me. Any colleagues who are also online today, if you have any issues with your audio or video connection, you can reach out to Conti or Lynn, and they can try to assist. Before we proceed with the roll call and the public comments, for the benefit of those who are observing this meeting via our YouTube channel, I want to just explain how we plan to facilitate today's meeting. First, we'll start with a roll call of the members participating in the meeting and confirm that we have a quorum. After that, we will accept comments from the public. I will have Lynn call out the names of those who are there in person to provide their comments, and you'll have 2 minutes each. After that, she'll summarize the comments we've received online. I ask that all of the commentators please respect the time limits to make sure that the board has time to go over all of the items on our agenda today. We do not have any action items on the agenda today, which means that we won't be adopting any resolutions or be taking a vote other than adopting the meeting minutes. During the meeting, I will have the presenters go first. They will complete their briefing. And then after, I'll invite questions or comments from members. We'll recognize you all by jurisdiction. If Lynn and Conti could help me sort of identify those in the room who might wish to speak or to be recognized. With that, Lynn Erickson, would you please call the roll?
Great, thank you. No problem. So I'm going to list the name of your jurisdiction or agency. If you could state your name, we'll capture your attendance. Starting with the District of Columbia, DC Council Charles Allen.
Here.
Thank you. DC Council Christina Henderson.
Here.
DC Council Matt Fruman.
Here.
DC Department of Transportation.
Amanda Stout, here.
Thank you. DC Office of Planning.
Rebecca Schwartzman, present.
Cool. Moving to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County. College Park. Frederick County. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, present.
Thanks, Kelly. City of Gaithersburg. City of Greenbelt.
Kristen Weaver, here.
City of Laurel. Montgomery County.
Marilyn Balcom, here.
Thanks.
Corey Pitts also here.
Great, thanks, Corey. Prince George's County.
Victor Weisberg here.
Thanks, Vic. Anyone else from Prince George's County? City of Rockville. Tacoma Park. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Drew Morrison here.
Thanks. Maryland House of Delegates. Mr. Corman indicated he would be joining later, by the way. Maryland Senate. Moving to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
Kanick, present.
Thanks, Kanick. Arlington County.
Takis here.
Thanks, Takis. City of Fairfax.
Tom Ross, present.
Thanks, Tom. Fairfax County.
James Walkinshaw, present. Walter Alcorn's here too.
Great, thanks. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder, present virtually.
Great, thanks. Loudoun County. City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky, present.
City of Manassas Park. Oh, thanks.
Jeanette Burchell, here.
Okay, thanks, Jeanette. Prince William County.
Victor Angry here.
Thank you.
Megan Landis, here.
Thanks, Megan. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Maria Senior, present.
Thanks, Maria. Virginia House of Delegates. Virginia Senate.
Jennifer Boysko, here remotely.
Thanks. Moving on to WMATA. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, National Capital Planning Commission.
Michael Weil here, NCPC.
Thanks. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. and National Park Service.
Hi, Laurel Hammock here.
Thanks, Laurel. Okay, that closes roll call. We have a quorum. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lynn. All right, we'll now move to the public comments. Lynn, if you could recognize those who have signed up to present comments in person, if we have any.
Great. So we have not had anyone sign up in person, but we've received 3 comments or 3 letters via email between noon Tuesday, October 15th and noon Tuesday, November 20th. And a summary as well as each comment can be found on our webpage. So I mentioned the 3 letters. Bill Pugh sent a letter on behalf of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. Mr. Pugh shared policy recommendations for advancing TPB and local government climate change commitments, writing that TPB should still lead on climate action. He enumerates 8 actions TPB and COG should take to advance these goals, including, and I'll list them, 8, there's 8 of them. The first, advance the TPB greenhouse gas reduction strategies. Second, put greenhouse gas reduction and resiliency accountability metrics in Visualize 2050. Third, prioritize transit funding. Fourth, track accessibly located housing. Fifth, boost the commuter cash program. Sixth, develop alternatives to road widening. 7, demand state level accountability. And lastly, provide local accountability for VMTs and EVs in local climate action plan monitoring. The second letter we received also from Bill Pugh, but this letter is on behalf of not only the Coalition for Smarter Growth, but also the Washington Area Bicyclists Association, DC Families for Safe Streets, Northern Virginia Families for Safe Streets, and the Fairfax Alliance for Better Bicycling. The letter is asking for TPB board, staff, and member agencies to take action on the steps proposed at the October 31st Roadway Safety Summit, including the 6 action items proposed, and calls on individual member jurisdictions to prioritize roadway safety over expanding roads. Lastly, George Abram sent a letter urging TPB to tackle the issues of environmental racism as a result of past transportation plans and the need to acknowledge that the current regional climate change goals are not aggressive enough. He acknowledges how tough these issues are and calls on the TPB to find win-win solutions. As I mentioned, all the comments are found on the meeting page. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, are there any questions for the staff before we move to the pieces? Okay, so we'll move to the second item on the agenda, which is the approval of the October 16th, 2024 meeting minutes. We have been provided a summary of these, and I trust that members have reviewed. I move that we do adopt the meeting minutes for the October, I'm sorry, I have 2 dates here. I think the date was the
October 16th.
16th as opposed to the 18th. Okay, apologies. May I have a second for the motion?
Second.
Great. Who was that exactly?
Ms. Zabisky.
Okay, great. If everyone could just help me out and just tell me who you are, if you are gonna do that. But thank you, Pam. All right. Are there any corrections or additions to the meeting minutes from the District of Columbia? Any from Maryland? Any from Virginia? Okay, great. Now for the vote, are there any nays or abstentions from the District of Columbia? Any from Maryland? Any from Virginia? Any from the other agencies? All right, hearing none, the meetings are adopted. So thank you, everyone. We'll now move on to the technical committee report. We have a written summary of their November 1st meeting, but I'll ask Amy Gabarini, who's the chair of the technical committee, if she could provide a summary of their meetings outcomes. Amy?
Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. The technical committee met Friday, November 1st and received briefings on 3 items that were reviewed for inclusion on today's TPB agenda. Those briefings included a review of the process for developing regional targets for transit safety and highway safety performance measures, along with a recap of the October 31st safety event, which highlighted regional concerns around recent roadway fatalities and serious injury trends, and looked at regional solutions to address these concerns. Finally, the Community Advisory Committee reminded us of their current recruitment for their 2025-2026 cohort. There were also a few items presented for information and discussion, including the draft 2024 Congestion Management Process Technical Report, which was accepted as final at the meeting. And then an update on Visualize 2050 and the new PIT 2.0 database, which is now live. And then also a presentation from NBTA updating us on their preliminary deployment regional BRT study. So that concludes my report, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Does anyone have any questions for Amy? Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Amy. We'll now move on to the Community Advisory Committee report. We have a written summary of their November 14th meeting. I'll ask the new chair, Ra Amin, to report out for us. Ra?
Good afternoon, TPB members. Thank you, Chair Henderson, Vice Chair Walkinshaw, Vice Chair Harris. The CAC meeting on November 14th included a presentation of the 2024 Street Smart campaign, a detailed discussion on DMV moves, a act locally round robin, and updates on CAC recruitment and meeting planning. Highlights included the following. TPB staff briefed members on the progress of the DMV Moves initiative. The presentation featured an overview of the work to date, focusing on the 6 recommendations that will be addressed by the working groups over the next few months. TPB staff suggested that after more work is done, they return to the CAC to solicit input. Here are a few highlights of our discussion. Discussion of the change in federal leadership and what the effects might be. Related initiatives such as the Transportation Forum and the plans for public outreach. During our Act Locally round robins, members shared their local community activities, including helping to ensure students to get to school safely and working on land use advisory boards. I invite the TPB members to read the CAC report for more details about our discussions. That concludes my report. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Mr. Amin? All righty. Thank you so much, Rob. We'll now move to the steering committee actions and the report of the director. And this will be from Conti. We have his written report. Conti, if you want to report out.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. You have a copy of my written report. I will briefly review parts of it, but will be glad to answer questions on all parts of it. The TPB steering committee met on November 1st and took the following actions. It started with amending the TIP to include about $4.8 million in federal grants under the newly created Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program for about 37 different projects in 7 localities in our region, all of whom are working to deploy level 2 EV charging ports in publicly accessible locations. The jurisdictions that are part of this grant program are the cities of Fairfax, Manassas, Alexandria, and the counties of Arlington, Fairfax, Frederick, and Prince George's County. Also, at the request of the District Department of Transportation, the TIP was amended to add about $1 million in another newly created grant program, the Protect Grant Program, for a project under the for the William Howard Taft Memorial Bridge Rehab Project. Maryland Department of Transportation also had a request to amend the TIP that was approved, and this amendment made a few different changes to the funding, including reducing the total cost of the Maryland 6 La Plata Accessibility Improvement Program, reducing the funding for the Maryland Hawthorne Road Bridge Replacement Project. It added about $9.25 million for the I-95-495 Maryland 4 Bridge Replacement Project. And it reduced the currently programmed funding for the National EV Infrastructure Program, the NEVI program, by about $166,000. And finally, it added about $8 million for the Maryland 97 Montgomery Hills Highway reconstruction project. Finally, this time the city of Rockville requested a TIP amendment that was approved, and this amendment added about $710,000 in federal neighborhood access and equity grant program. And this was for the planning and preliminary design work of the Twin Brook bicycle and pedestrian bridge. Moving away from the TIP amendments, this time we had the City of Alexandria and the District of Columbia request that we amend the TPB's Unified Planning Work Program to add a couple of studies that they are undertaking within the city. It's the Duke Street Corridor Plan Study, which received a FTA pilot program grant for transit-oriented development. And the District Department of Transportation is undertaking a study on the Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue underpass flood mitigation, which received some Protect grant funds. Turning to the announcements and updates, on page 65 in your packet, you will see the proposed schedule of meetings for the TPB next year. Except for January, most of the other dates are typical, meaning they are on the third Wednesday of the month, noon to 2. The January meeting, however, will be on the fourth Wednesday instead of the usual third Wednesday, partially because of how the December 2024 holidays are shaping out, and also January of 2025 having 5 Wednesdays. Later on today's agenda, you will be discussing the TPB's recent Regional Roadway Safety Summit. Along that theme of roadway safety, I wanted to share with you that the Fall 2024 Street Smart campaign is currently underway. The campaign was kicked off with a successful launch event on October 29th, where we unveiled the new themes for the advertisements for Street Smart. And the theme is Slow Down, Life Ahead. On screen now, we are sharing some photos of the new updated advertisement materials. Hopefully you'll be seeing these around the region on buses, perhaps on some street walking teams in neighborhoods through the Thanksgiving time. And of course, these materials will be used in future campaign waves as well. Many thanks to Prince George's County and Maryland partners for hosting the launch event. And a special thanks to our WMATA partners for securing the Naylor Road Metro Station location. It was an ideal spot, we felt, where it brings together all of the different audiences, the drivers, the pedestrians, and the cyclists. Also, our thanks to our law enforcement partners who supported the campaign on a very busy day. It was the same day that the current Vice President was giving a speech in the District of Columbia, and to everyone else from around the region who came out for the event. COG's Executive Director Clark Mercer was there and used the event for one of the new short video podcasts that COG puts out. Appreciate the effort there to spread the word on this campaign. I would also like to call out Mike Doyle from the Northern Virginia Families for Safe Streets, who spoke and shared his personal story as a crash survivor. That really underscored the reason why this campaign is undertaken and why we do this work. That was in my return report. Couple items to add. December 11th of this year, COG board is holding its annual event. It's a new format. It's a reception type of event from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. in the DC Water Headquarters building. We shared information about this with you all last month. We will send you another email right after today's meeting. If you are able to attend, that will be great. It's a great opportunity to come meet all the other board members and other leading staff, senior staffs at the regional level working on many of these commonly shared issues. Finally, on December 2nd of this year, VDOT is holding their joint meeting, something that their legislation had just recently required VDOT to hold. And it's essentially a forum for various transportation entities to receive comments or inputs from the public in terms of what they would like to see prioritized in funding for the next round. The TPB has been invited to attend this event as well, and thank you, Vice Chair James Walkinshaw, for agreeing to represent the TPB on that event. That's a quick review of my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Henderson.
Thanks so much, Conti. Does anyone have any questions for Conti regarding either his summary or written report?
I have one in the room, Kristen Weaver from Greenbelt. So I just had a question about that charging and fueling infrastructures, that item, because it looks like if you look at the map and the list, almost all of those are in Virginia. There were only 2 in Maryland. That's not a very even distribution of those projects around the region. Is there an explanation for why that, for this particular funding that was happening, that's unevenness?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That is a discretionary grant that we had to apply. So the COG, Council of Governments, and the TPB did not apply for it, but the Council of Governments did through their Climate, Energy, Environment Policy Committee activities. So for that round, it essentially depends on which of our member jurisdictions are ready and able to provide the matching money and to undertake the work if the grant is successful. This is a new program. The bipartisan infrastructure law was for a 5-year period. So this was the very first round of application that was submitted. We have already submitted a second round of application. And these 7 jurisdictions were the ones who had already identified what locations would be ready, if they are prepared to immediately deploy these infrastructures at those locations. For the second round, there has been even more number of jurisdictions who have now participated. So we anticipate submitting these requests every year. So for all of our members who might not have been quite ready to propose specific projects in this past application, there's always an opportunity to do that.
Well, I hope then in the future ones, there are more from the Maryland side, and that we try to overall, if these are for a few years, we balance it out a little bit more across the region. Thank you.
If I could just and just to clarify on the Maryland side, we certainly look forward to partnering more with COG and TPB on the second round. So you're aware, we're also pursuing. We have our federal discretionary money through the NEVI program, where we're right now working through the alternative fuel corridors, which is the first priority. So we're continuing to advance that on the MDOT side, and then a number of Maryland entities, including the Maryland Clean Energy Center, pursued CFI funding, so a similar program for continued EV advancement. So happy to talk more about ways on the Maryland side we can keep working on that.
And it might be useful at some point to have sort of a more collective view of what we already have, what funding is being pursued, just because if this is just a snapshot, it looks very uneven and it doesn't comprise all of the different efforts that are happening.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Great, I don't see any. Okay, I'll go on to the next, which is the chairman's remarks. So my term as chair and the 2 terms of the 2 vice chairs will end next month. One of my responsibilities as the chair, I have convened the nominating committee to bring to the board a slate of candidates for positions of the chair and the 2 vice chairs next month. I've asked our director, Conti, to assist with the committee, and I want to thank past chairs of the TPB, Charles Allen, Pam Sebesky, and Ruben Collins, for agreeing to serve on the nominating committee. At the start of my term as chair, I had identified roadway safety as a focus area of mine. Today's agenda is mostly about safety of our transportation system on the roadways and out on our transit system. Importantly, we held what I would say is a very productive and engaging Regional Roadway Safety Summit last month, and I want to thank everyone for their participation. I found the summit to be very well designed with topics, and the speakers were experts in their field and had very thoughtful things to add to the conversation about how we can move roadway safety forward here in our national capital region. What we heard and discussed in the various panel sessions was relevant and helped us brainstorm in ways I think that we as a regional planning body can help transportation agencies in their efforts to drastically change the trajectory of roadway safety outcomes for our region. And what I mean by that, to be more clear, is to reverse the trend of fatalities and serious injury crashes. We will hear later today during today's meeting several of the ideas that were proposed during the summit, and I look forward to hearing from members today. If you have any other further ideas that we can take on as a board to provide some direction to the staff about implementing these ideas as part of their work activities. More importantly, though, I would love for all of our jurisdictions to have a renewed sense of commitment to work on these actions and take this work seriously. And with that, let's get started. So again, like I said at the beginning of the meeting, we don't have any action items. So these are all for information, but it will and hopefully culminate in action items that we will take at our December meeting. Okay, so item 7, which is the PBPP, the draft targets for the transit and highway safety. So this is an annual activity where we review how the region has performed against previous roadway and transit safety targets and update those targets for the next year. So today we'll hear from staff about the proposed updates to both sets of targets for both transit and roadway. And then next month we'll be asked to adopt the updated target list. We will pause after each presentation and take some questions and comments. And yeah, all right, so we'll get started. Eric Randall from TPB staff will start off things, and I think there are some other staff members who will join thereafter. Eric?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'm going to introduce this afternoon's presentation before turning over to my colleagues Pierre Gonord and Jeannie Nam, who will respectively discuss the annual transit and annual highway safety targets that the board is required to adopt as part of the federally required performance-based planning and programming process, or PBPP, as we call it for short. So as Madam Chair already said, we're going to have a two-part discussion this afternoon. This item is all about the data, visiting you again with this annual process, and then there will be the second part talking about policy discussions and so forth. So today we're continuing with the PBPP approach. This will be the 4th time the board will be considering annual transit safety targets and the 8th time annual highway safety targets. Each of my colleagues will talk about the process that's federally required for establishing targets. They will talk about recent performance against past targets, and then where we're at on draft targets for adoption this year, which again, we would bring back to the board next month in their final form for approval. There have been some changes this year, and so our draft targets are probably going to adjust a little bit, modest adjustments. But again, we wanted to get all this information in front of you for the board so that we can get your feedback before we bring everything back in December. As a reminder, PBPP was established under Federal Surface Transportation legislation, MAP 21, FAST Act, and continued in IIJA. There are requirements for state DOTs, for transit agencies that receive federal funds, and for metropolitan planning organizations. Again, PBPP is meant to be a data-driven approach using information to make investment and policy decisions to achieve performance goals. I was in a conversation earlier today as we prepare a Visualize 2050 long-range transportation plan. We will be writing a chapter all about how we use performance data and information to influence the transportation projects and programs in this region. As a reminder, there are 2 options generally for setting targets under PBPP. Either MPOs can adopt regional targets, or we can support statewide targets. In our case, we could support 1, 2, or all 3 states in their statewide targets because of our somewhat unusual size and structure of the National Capital Region, where we stretch across the multi-states. We've consistently developed and adopted regional targets for the metropolitan planning area in coordination with DOTs and transit agency. As a reminder, we do not get reviewed by the federal officers for our performance against those targets. We do have to discuss it in our long-range plan. When they review our long-range plan in 2026, we will talk about what we do, but there are no penalties or incentives for meeting or not meeting the targets. So just a reminder on that. However, for DOTs, there are penalties if they don't meet their safety targets. So it's a bit of a different case for them. I'll now turn the floor over to my colleague, Pierre.
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, Chair Henderson and members of the board. As Eric mentioned, I'll now walk you through our process for setting this year's regional transit safety targets. So we'll start by discussing the federal regulations that actually require these targets be set, then move on to who in the region the requirements actually apply to. We'll review all of the performance measures requiring targets be set, including the 7 new performance measures now required as of this past spring. Then take a look at how last year's adopted targets compare with actual performance. Finally, wrapping up with an overview of our draft targets for 2024. So federal, as Eric said, PBPP regulations require applicable providers of public transportation to develop and certify an agency safety plan on an annual basis. That plan must include annual safety performance targets. MPOs are required to set regional safety targets for our respective areas in coordination with state and agency officials. TPB sets annual targets following the state and agency adoption of its own targets. And I will mention here that federal regulations also include a separate target setting requirement for the Safety Risk Reduction Program, which applies to large urban area transit providers. That is outside the scope of today's presentation and TPB's regional target setting program as well. So who do the requirements apply to? They apply to recipients and subrecipients of Federal Chapter 53 funding, who are providers of public transportation, with the exception of recipients of 5310 and 5311 funding recipients. What this ultimately means is whoever in the region receives 5307 formula funding will fall under this requirement. In this region, that includes WMATA, DDOT, MDOT, MTA, PRTC, and the suburban transit providers in Maryland, Van Gogh Transit, Ride-On, and the bus. Moving on now to the performance measures that these agencies must report. The providers must set targets for the following 14 performance measures. Until this past April, only 7 performance measures were required for target setting, but effective this past May, public transportation safety plans must set targets for an additional 7 measures. As you see on this table in bold, the 7 new measures are meant to increase attention to transit worker safety and the varied risks posed by vehicle collisions. The original 7 performance measures continue to be required without change. The events reported for these measures must have occurred on transit property or right-of-way during a transit-related maintenance activity, or must have involved a transit revenue vehicle. Now, looking at the reviewing the targets that were adopted by the board last year, this table reflects those targets, and as previously mentioned, this was adopted before the new requirement to set the targets for the 7 new measures. So it only shows the targets for the original 7 measures. The rates appearing here were and continue to be set by dividing the total count for X measure, which here appears under the column number or titled number, by the total vehicle revenue miles provided by the agency to us, or listed in the most recent National Transit Database Agency profile. The resulting number is then multiplied by 100,000 to reflect the rate of these incidents occurring per 100,000 vehicle revenue miles. That is the case with the exception of heavy rail, where because of the high vehicle revenue mileage, it's actually calculated per 10 million vehicle revenue miles. Looking now at the actual performance in 2023, I'd like to bring your attention to the column on the for everyone's right side of the table, which compares 2023 versus 2022 actual performance. The arrows pointing up reflect higher total counts for each applicable category, point down for reduced counts, and horizontal for unchanged. As you can see, most performance across transit modes was either unchanged or improved, which is demonstrated by decreased counts compared to 2022. However, heavy rail and local bus stood out for increased incidents year to year. Comparing 2023 performance with our regional targets, looking at the same column, the arrows in green met our 2023 targets, while those in red did not. Generally, most of our regional safety targets were met, with some notable exceptions. There were significantly more safety events that occurred on fixed route local buses than the target set. 742 actual events versus 356 that were targeted for. This is largely represented due to a high count on Metrobus, which is also due to the fact that they have a significantly higher proportion of service provided in the region. Fatalities are targeted at 0. However, there were 8 total fatalities involving transit vehicles or facilities, largely, I won't say largely, but due to a combination of both accidents and criminal activity. Commuter bus and streetcar services also experienced higher than targeted injury and safety event incidents. However, in good news, actual injuries and safety events on demand response services were significantly less than the set targets. Finally, let's take a look at this year's draft transit safety targets. We have received the target data for the original 7 performance measures from almost all providers in the region. As a result, we're able to calculate draft targets for these measures as shown here. With the exception of only a few data points like commuter bus reliability, we do not anticipate the final targets to vary too widely from what is shown here. With the exception of targets for demand response services, most incident totals for injuries and safety events do have a higher target ceiling for 2024 than in 2023. However, this is likely a reflection of both increased ridership on these modes and the increased incidents in actual performance for heavy rail and local bus between 2023 and 2022. Targets for the 7 new performance measures are not included here. We are still missing data from most transit providers about their respective targets for those new measures, but plan to include these in the final targets that will be presented to the board for adoption next month. So with that, I will pass it to my colleague, Janie.
Janie, I think the chair wanted to take some questions before we go to the highway.
That is correct, Conti. Just so we don't lose the opportunity if someone has some specific questions on the transit portion.
Madam Chair, question in the room.
Yep.
Walter Alcorn. So I realize there are no penalties. I realize there are no incentives for these. I guess my request would be perhaps for next year, if we do continue to see missing targets, can we get more information on why? Just have a little bit more detail so we can understand what might be driving some of these, particularly obviously heavy rail and local bus were the areas this year.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Dave Snyder. Madam Chair, if I might, just a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks so much. So even this year, does the report include actions that the agencies are taking to hopefully bring down these numbers in future years? Thank you.
Well, I'll say that when we set these targets, we're setting the measures as sort of a demonstration of what has happened, what we expect to happen on the regional scale, but ultimately the agencies will address those concerns in their own safety plans versus us in any sort of regional document. We don't, it's my understanding, publish or release any sort of regional transit safety plan. And Therefore, I guess we don't share that information beyond sharing these these data points, as well as what's included in the memo to the board. However, if you look at each agency's annual safety plan, that typically does include information about how risks are being reduced, how these incidents are being addressed at a much more sort of local level.
I think, Mr. Snyder, we can, picking up on Mr. Alcorn's suggestion on next, for every year when we bring these updated targets, we can try to summarize what some of the leading causes were that caused them to miss the targets. But we can also provide the link to the more detailed action plans that each agency is taking, because as Eric alluded to, as the MPO, since we don't fund, operate, maintain transit, there are no penalties for us, but certainly at the agency level there is. So I would say that the transit agencies are working towards it, and we can try to provide that linkage to that action plan.
Well, that would be great. Thank you very much. Because we're all, dissatisfied and want to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Good. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll move now on to that highway portion.
Good morning, Madam Chair and and board members. I'm here today to brief you on our regional highway safety targets. Similar to the transit safety targets, the federal government requires MPOs to review roadway safety performance and to set roadway safety targets each year for their region. So I'll be spending a few minutes today providing an overview of our target setting process, followed by a review of our region's performance against the 2019 to 2023 safety targets. And I'll also be sharing staff recommendations for the next set of regional safety targets, but want to note that they're based on preliminary projections and may be moderately adjusted when we receive finalized information. The requirement to set safety targets was established in 2016 by an FHWA final rule to encourage states and MPOs to apply a data-driven and strategic approach to improving safety on public roads. And by requiring safety targets and ongoing evaluation of safety performance, the regulation aims to promote transparency and accountability, enables the tracking and understanding of progress on roadway safety, and facilitates informed transportation planning and investment decisions. The rule requires state DOTs and MPOs to adopt annual highway safety targets in 5 performance categories and to measure and report on progress towards those targets on a yearly basis. State DOTs must report their targets each year by August 31st, and MPOs are to report their safety targets within the following 180 days. And note that while the final rule refers to the targets as highway safety targets, they apply to all public roads regardless of ownership or functional class. The 5 performance measures that state DOTs and MPOs must set targets for are the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities per 100 million VMT, the number of serious injuries, the rate of serious injuries per 100 million VMT, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, and these must all be reported as 5-year rolling averages. The federal final rule does not prescribe a method for setting targets. States and MPOs are allowed to develop their own methodology for setting targets. And because our region is comprised of 3 different states, TPB staff uses an approach that results in a composite target based on subtargets for each state. Essentially, we apply each state's methodology to their respective portions in a region and then combine them into a regional composite target. If a calculated target is higher than the previous year's target, we cap it at the previous year's level so that we don't recommend a higher target this year than was adopted last year. And this is what we've had to do, for example, with our target for the number of fatalities, which has been capped at 253 deaths since 2018. This year, our process has had 2 adjustments. First, in Maryland agencies have transitioned from using MDOT to the Maryland State Police Data Warehouse as their official source for crash data. And one difference in how the 2 sources count fatalities is that the Maryland State Police database includes non-traffic fatalities, which can include fatalities that are caused by a medical event or that occur on non-public roads like a parking lot or a private driveway. And as a result, the numbers may be slightly higher than what we would typically see. Secondly, data for the urbanized area of Fauquier County is no longer included after the county changed its membership status earlier this year, as you recall, based on an U.S. Census update to urbanized area boundaries. And just for reference, that portion of Fauquier County has contributed on average 1 fatality and 17 serious injuries to our regional total since 2013. So in the next few slides, I'll review the region's performance in 2023 against its 2019 to 2023 roadway safety targets. This table shows our regional safety outcomes by year from 2019 through 2023, with that last column on the right showing the percent change for each measure since last year. And as you can see, the number of fatalities and serious injuries in our region continued to increase in 2023. The number of fatalities continue to remain elevated, but the rate of increase in 2023, which was about 3%, was smaller than the increase in 2022, which was about 5%. Serious injuries increased after decreasing last year, continuing a pattern of fluctuation that we've seen over the last 5 years. And non-motorist fatalities and serious injuries, which increased by approximately 23% between 2021 and 2022, headed back in the right direction with an almost 9% decrease. This slide gives a graphical illustration of the fatalities data that was just presented on the previous slide, with the blue line displaying the annual fatality numbers and that red line showing the 5-year rolling average. So a lot of those ups and downs are smoothed out. And as you can see, the overall trend is upward, but also the rate of increase has grown smaller in recent years. You can see this a little bit more clearly in this next slide. The rate of increase since 2021 has been moderating, suggesting that these increases are starting to level off. And one trend that staff would like to note is pedestrian fatalities as a proportion of total fatalities. Over the last 20 years, pedestrian fatalities have accounted for about 26% of annual fatalities, and this is shown with the dotted orange line in the bar graph. However, over the last 10 years, that proportion has started to inch up towards 27%, which is illustrated by the dashed red line. And in 5 out of the last 6 years, the annual proportion of pedestrian fatalities have come in above that 27% average, including in 2023, when it was 28%. This is something that you may have already observed anecdotally through news reports, but it is also reflected in our regional data as well, and we wanted to highlight this. Overall, the data shows that the rate that fatalities are increasing is moderating compared to previous years. Fatalities continue to stay elevated, but they're increasing at a slower rate, suggesting that fatalities may be leveling off. And after an increase in 2022, non-motorist fatalities and serious injuries began to head back in the right direction in 2023. The decline was driven by decreases in fatalities and serious injuries for both pedestrians and bicyclists compared to last year. Compared to 2022, but the proportion of pedestrian fatalities continues to remain high compared to the average annual percentage in past years. And compared to the 2019 to 2023 regional safety targets, which were adopted by the TPB in December of 2022, our region fell short of meeting the targets for all 5 categories. Based on projections provided by our state partners, staff calculates the following targets for the period 2021 to 2025. We would like to note that these targets are based on preliminary projections, so they may adjust slightly once we receive the finalized information. In addition, some of the targets are capped. We continue to keep the number of fatalities and the fatality rate capped as we have in past years. We are also recommending capping the serious injury rate, since the preliminary projections showed it being higher than the target rate adopted last year. These are the targets that staff are recommending for the TPB's consideration. And I'll turn things over to my colleague, Eric, who will close this out.
So to conclude, we are still working to get some of the last data on the regional transit and the highway safety side, as some of the agencies are still working on putting their data and information together this year. We will be bringing this information to the board in December, so we want everything ready for mail out on December 12th. When that mail out goes out, that should have the final targets that we as staff are recommending be adopted for the metropolitan planning area. After the board approves the targets, we are required then to transmit the adopted targets to the 3 state DOTs in accordance with the written agreements that we have documented between each of us for performance planning reporting. And then this information will also go into our long-range plan and transportation improvement program being developed next year. That we as staff will be happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you so much, team. Okay, we got a number of folks online. So why don't I work through those and then we'll turn to those who are in the room. Cindy?
Thank you. I might have missed it. So you're recommending targets for the coming year, and they are based on what actually has been happening, or they're based on some comparative safety analysis across other communities, or on what we would like to be happening? Because 0 would be ideal, but that's not realistic. So what are they based the targets based on? If you said it, I missed it, I apologize.
The projections are from our state DOT partners, and it's our understanding that they are based on past data performance.
And Ms. DeBala, the federal requirements kind of, in a way, tie the hands of the MPOs or the state DOTs in the sense that we are mandated to adopt targets that are data-driven and not aspirational. Many of our TPB board members' jurisdictions have adopted Vision Zero as their aspirational goal, and the TPB has spoken in support of that as where we would like to see. So these are really, we have to not look at just last year's data. They ask us to look at the past 5 years to establish the trend in which this is going. Regrettably, till 2019, till the onset of COVID, the trend was heading in the right direction. We still had a lot more fatalities, but every year they had been going down. But since then, we had seen a significant increase. And as Janie reported, 2023 was the first time we have begun to see a little bit lower rate of increase. That's really still not a good news because it is still increasing, but it is increasing at a lower rate. So we have significant amount of work to do to get the data to indicate that this is indeed going down. Our aspirations are there, but it's been a tough one to get to change its trend.
Thank you for that explanation. And yes, it is very difficult. We've discovered that at the local level as well. But so the targets are based on data, projecting from data of what has actually been happening over the last 5 years, to make a long story short, right?
That's correct. The only thing
Okay,
the TPB has said in its approach, and this was something that they decided about 8 years ago, is once the target is set at a certain level, even if the data shows that the performance did not meet the target, and in fact, there were higher number of incidents, the TPB has said as a means of putting pressure on all of the agencies and all of us to get that number to go down, they were not going to set the target at a higher number. For example, the 5 years fatalities data would have us set the fatalities target for next year somewhere in the 340 range.
Right.
But at one time, the target was 253. So we have kept it at 253, saying we are not going to accept 350. So in a way, you can see it as TPB saying thus far, no further. Right? We'll follow the federal guidelines, but we don't want to be so totally data driven that we're going to accept these higher numbers.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Boysico?
Thanks so much. Much of my question was just answered, but I just wanted to confirm whether or not you would all be able to share with us the reasons for the fatalities in some sort of a metric so that we can analyze that at the state level as we're considering what we need to do to help to make our streets and roads more safe. Would that be possible?
Yes, we can certainly do that. Based on the 2023 data set that we received, it does appear that some of the increases are being driven by a moderate increase in the number of fatalities involving speeding, and also a significant increase in the number of fatalities involving motorcyclists. There was actually a over 50% increase in motorcyclist fatalities in 2023. But this is just based on the 2023 data set that we received. We are currently working on a larger safety study, which we hope to release early next year. And that's going to have a much broader perspective. It's going to cover a data set that's several years, both pre and post pandemic. And we will be looking at contributing factors under that study. So we hope to circle back with the board once we have those results available.
Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks very much. Just a quick note of support for what Senator Boysko just asked for. And also a request that our package, when we vote on this in December, include a summary of the various regional and agency actions to try to bring these numbers down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can certainly do that.
Thanks.
Okay. Conti or Lynn, I can't see the folks in the room who might have a question or comment.
Nothing yet.
All righty. Well, thank you to the team for that presentation. And just as a reminder to folks, in December, we'll be having this conversation again as we're asked to vote on the new targets. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the TPB Roadway Safety Summit and recap and recommendations. We'll start with Janie Nam on staff to review a bit more about what happened at the summit and the topics that were covered and who spoke and who we heard from. And then after that, we'll hear from Andrew Meese about the ideas that were proposed for the TPB to consider. And I would actually suggest that we hold out on questions until both of their presentations are complete. So, Janie, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Henderson. Actually, I'm Andrew Meese, and I'll say an introductory remark before turning it over to Janie. Good afternoon, and members of the board. My colleague Janie Nam and I will review and present the discussions and recommendations from the TPB's October 31st Regional Roadway Safety Summit, followed by an opportunity for you as the board to discuss the recommendations from the summit as ideas for potential further actions. Also note that read-ahead materials for today's presentation and discussion also included a summary memo, which provides a few more details, as well as a memo attachment that provides staff's summary of the ideas raised on October 31st. And it also matches the content of a key slide in the upcoming presentation. So there's no difference between the two. It's for your convenience. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Janie Nam, who will review the presentations and discussions that occurred at the October 31st summit, and then I will review the staff summary of the ideas raised at the summit. Janie?
Thank you, Andy. The 2024 TPB Regional Roadway Safety Summit was held on October 31st at the APTA Centennial Conference Center in Alexandria. And the goals of the summit were to inform the TPB about current safety trends and practices, and to give board members the opportunity to develop and share potential safety actions the region could pursue to improve roadway safety. The event brought together members of the TPB and relevant subcommittees, safety experts, local safety practitioners, and members of the public. About 60 people were in attendance, including 13 TPB board members and alternates, with a handful of board members participating virtually, and approximately 20 observers on the YouTube live stream. After a welcome from Conti and introductory comments by Vice Chair Walkinshaw, Vice Chair Harris moderated session 1, which featured presentations on national and regional safety issues to provide context for board discussions in the later portion of the summit. In this session, Vanessa Holt of Fairfax County staff, who is also the chair of TPB's Transportation Safety Subcommittee, reviewed the region's safety picture. Ms. Holt noted that roadway fatalities have been rising in our region since the mid-2010s, while serious injuries have generally been on a downward trend since 2010. Nicole Waldheim of the consulting firm Fair & Pierce provided insights on the importance of taking a systemic approach to safety to prevent accidents or incidents before they occur. She discussed system-level challenges such as managing speed, incorporating equity, improving livability, funding, vehicle design, impairment, and encourage attendees to think about the bigger factors and upstream causes contributing to roadway safety to achieve meaningful improvements. The presentations were followed by an active Q&A session that touched on a variety of topics, including the value of near-miss data, how the TPB can influence vehicle design standards, how to influence driver behavior, understanding the appetite for more comprehensive driving tests, consistency in operations and enforcement on a regional scale, approaches to enforcement of minor offenses, and focusing efforts on top contributing factors. In session 2, which was moderated by Vice Chair Walkinshaw, attendees heard from 2 guest speakers who provided frameworks for the potential strategies TPB and its members can consider. Paul Teicher of the USDOT Office of the Secretary discussed efforts at the USDOT to advance safety, such as the National Roadway Safety Strategy and Safe Systems Approach, as well as federal programs to assist localities with their safety efforts, including the Allies for Action campaign and the Safe Streets for All grant program. He was followed by Dr. Jeffrey Michael of the Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health, who provided a public health interpretation of the safe system approach and shared case studies from around the country on communities that overcame challenges in the development or implementation of their Vision Zero program. The Q&A session touched on several topics related to the implementation and nurturing of safety practices, including key strategies of Vision Zero communities that have achieved zero deaths, how stakeholders of different disciplines can bridge divides to work together, and how to build momentum in a new Vision Zero program. Following sessions 1 and 2, Chair Henderson moderated session 3, where board members discussed additional actions the TPB and its members could take to improve roadway safety outcomes. And I'll turn things over to my colleague, Andrew Meese, who will go over the outcomes from that discussion.
Thank you, Janie. I will now review the summit proposed recommendations that are summarized on slide 5, which is now being shown. And then I'll briefly touch on 2 additional slides. Then we can return to slide 5 for the board's discussion. Again, on slide 5, staff has tried to summarize what was a long back and forth discussion in the 2 sessions and the 3rd session that took place at the summit. We've tried to summarize it for clarity, but we welcome the feedback of those of you who participated for anything we may have missed or miswrote about. So as for the staff summary here, the recommendations are summarized as 6 major action ideas, numbered 1 through 6, with bullets describing additional aspects or support actions associated with those 6 ideas. So I'll just go through those in order briefly. In number 1, there was a thought to return to the safety resolution that the TPB adopted in 2020, which is R3-2021, which stated the TPB's goal for safety, as well as providing an attached list of 40-some safety strategies recommended for action by TPB member agencies. An obvious question is, what action has there been on those recommended strategies since 2020? We as staff have anecdotes to what has been implemented, but as of yet, there's not been an organized summary of inventory on a regional level of what has been accomplished. Therefore, the idea was raised. And so idea number one, to do such an inventory or follow up to resolution R3-2021 so that we have a better picture of what actually has been implemented in the region. Going on to number two, Janie mentioned Paul Teicher and going over the several federal programs and goals, and one of those was the Allies in Action Partnership. And a variety of public and private sector entities have already pledged to be a part of Allies in Action, including all three of our state DOTs and our sister metropolitan planning organization for the Baltimore region. And therefore, pledging this Allies in Action where we can talk, or TPB can talk, both about the actions that the region is already doing, as well as looking forward to some new and additional actions could be part of this pledge. So that's idea number two. Idea number three follows up on the TPB's discussions back in 2021 on holding dangerous drivers accountable across state lines, including interstate reciprocity for automated enforcement violations. COG Executive Director Clark Mercer was present and discussed this at the summit, leading to a recommendation that the TPB might partner with COG to address this important topic, which has a lot of aspects, legislative aspects and so forth. So COG will be critical there. Gathering more information is associated with that. Idea four, to continue and strengthen coordination on regional level regarding advocacy at the federal level or advising on the federal level for safety, for things such as safety standards. And we heard from, on our last agenda item, a discussion of speeds and vehicle design, of whether they are contributing to the safety picture here. So coordinating on that is idea number four. Idea number five, to regionally track and raise awareness of transportation safety funding and grant opportunities. A lot of words out there on the various grant and opportunities that become available, but earlier warning and better organizing will always be better for that. So, but the big list here is idea number six. It's an ideas around the concept of Vision Zero. Many of TPB's member agencies have already pledged Vision Zero and have created plans, projects, and programs that support Vision Zero. Much of the discussion on October 31st revolved around gathering more information, such as on success stories, what more information is needed, and what TPB could put in place as a regional context for members' Vision Zero efforts. So there's a long list there of the associated ideas, what's worked best, inventories. Again, an emphasis on the systems approach or systemic approach. Definitely this summit had talked about the systems view rather than the individual strategy view, but we do have a lot of information on strategies. Enhancing coordination with non-transportation partners like medical examiners, emerging technologies are on there. Let me skip ahead. There was a discussion, and I think you just discussed a moment ago, well, what are the involved factors? What's driving the safety pictures, the safety picture? Janie alluded to the ongoing safety study that staff is anticipating presenting to you in the spring of 2025. And according to the current state of that incomplete study, this is the list of the 6 most common involved factors in the fatal crashes for that 5-year period shown 2019 to 2023. And I'll read them: roadway departure at an intersection, speeding, not wearing a seatbelt, pedestrian hit by a vehicle, and impaired driving. And of course, any given crash could have more than one of those factors involved as well. So that explains a little bit about a little bit of amplification on the previous slide. And finally, on slide 7, before I flip it back to slide 5, just a reminder that the summit recording and a wealth of meeting-related materials are available on the TPB website at the link shown. And of course, we as staff, as well as the TPB's Standing Transportation Safety Subcommittee and the Regional Roadway Safety Program, will use the summit's ideas in our ongoing work. With that, I'm going to flip back to slide 5. And we can leave this showing during this discussion, I think, if that's the preference. And unless Conti has comments, we can turn it back to you, Chair Henderson, to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie and Andrew. I want to certainly hear from everyone, but first I want to turn to the vice chairs who moderated the panels to see if they have anything that they wanted to add. So I'll start with James and then we'll go to Neil.
Chair Henderson, Mr. Walkinshaw had to leave, but I believe Neil is online.
Okay. Mr. Harris? All right, we'll come back. Okay, so we'll open it up for any comments or questions or thoughts about this. I see Mayor Ashton.
Yes, thank you for the presentations and recommended actions. One of the things I wanted to note is as our region's population grows, we are seeing that housing is built on what was traditionally state highway roads. There's already commerce activity, but we're likely to see more mixed use activity in some of our jurisdictions. And so I think there needs to be special attention paid to the safety measures and recommendations that we can make on those state roads, as well as looking at the cross-regional safety. In the city of Rockville, we looked at where our most serious fatalities and serious crashes and fatalities, excuse me, have occurred. And it's traditionally on state roads. So even though in our jurisdiction we can do everything right for Vision Zero, if we don't address, the state highway situation, and knowing that we're probably going to see more housing along them, and people need to get to work, to school, get to their activities, I think we're going to be missing the mark.
Thank you, Mayor Ashton.
So you want to say?
Drew Morrison from MDOT here in the room. First, want to appreciate Mayor Ashton's comments and the MDOT. We acknowledge that there is a lot of work to be done in achieving our goal of Vision Zero. We put forward under Secretary Wiedefeld a new complete streets policy, which affirms our goals to build and redesign roads to be safe for all users. But there's a lot of work left to be done. And as we approach this year's legislative session, in particular, we're interested in working to advance safety with our partners in the General Assembly. In terms of some of the specific recommendations, I want to commend the staff for the good work that they've done. And I think a lot of the devil is in the details of what the work plan looks like coming out of this. In terms of particular items that from our perspective, we'd like to dive deep on. Definitely the theme here of racing to the top. To the extent there are things that any of us as jurisdictions through policy and procedure can do to be leading edge in the country. We'd like that to happen, and we'd like TPB to keep us honest about where we need to get to. When it comes to the Vision Zero plan itself, we'd hope that the focus would be on what TPB and COG can do within the specific roles that they play. Certainly, as the mayor just mentioned, there are things that the State Highway Administration and we need to do to make our state roads safer. What are things that TPB and COG can do to push for safety in policy and in resources and in activities? So really making sure that plan is tied into what is the nexus here. And then the other piece, the federal safety rulemaking, is something I mentioned at the summit. We really believe in. NHTSA just announced a major update to their 5-star crash test system that matters, particularly for vulnerable users. We need to make sure that our federal partners continue to make progress, and to the extent that every individual jurisdiction here can write letters and advocate, and we can do that as a TPB and a COG. That matters, and that's a piece of the puzzle. So we're excited to support all of this and happy to contribute however we can.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts or questions?
Kristen Weaver in the room. I know you can't see us, for City of Greenbelt. So as the city has done some pilot, and some other also municipalities near us have done some pilots with stop sign cameras. And it's kind of horrifying when you watch the videos about how few people, I don't think they've captured any accidents that I've seen yet, but a lot of near misses. So I think looking at the impacts of automated enforcement, I think that's a useful one. We haven't started, we're just in a data collection phase. We're not even issuing any tickets yet, but you can see the videos and how many people just rush through those. And I also think looking at some of those near misses, because I know all of this, the safety stats we were talking about previously capture the actual accidents and fatalities, but there's also, what about the things that almost happened? I think if there's harder to capture, I recognize, but potentially valuable. So I just wanted to comment on that we're taking at the local level, trying to take some measures, but it would be good to have a more holistic approach and to share what has worked among the local jurisdictions. And we, of course, also have state highway running right through Greenbelt that we share some of the concerns that Mayor Ashton commented of things that we can have control over and things that we have partners that we have to work with to help with. But appreciate it. I listened to the very beginning of the session on the 31st. I wasn't able to stay for all of it online, but it was very interesting what I heard of it. So thanks for pulling it together.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder.
Sure, thanks a lot. I'd like to follow up the prior speaker and indicate that I think an area where I'm particularly interested in regional coordination is collecting information on all forms of electronic enforcement. That is, what are the laws and regulations provide for, and what is the data shown about the success of that? And that's exactly the issue with stop sign that was mentioned by the prior speaker. We're seeing big time exactly where we are, and the other forms. So that's a particular area of focus that I would appreciate the COG gathering the existing information region-wide. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't see anybody on the room yet, Ms. Henderson.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Sebeski had a comment.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment on Mr. Snyder's comments. In the city of Manassas, we did implement in an intersection the red light camera law that went into effect in Virginia a couple of years ago. So it was one of the intersections we were able to put the red light camera ticketing into place. And we have decreased accidents there by more than 50 to 75% and no further fatalities there. It's a very busy intersection because it's part of a state road and it's very heavily traveled. And by the nature of how it is set up, it was even dangerous for our law enforcement when these accidents happen to try to navigate it. But now that the people are getting ticketed by the red light camera, they've stopped running the light. So obviously there's been less crashes as well as fatalities. So I do think that the legislation that our states put out to allow jurisdictions flexibility in recognizing this, because even though we had much enforcement there, it wasn't the same as these cameras that have been able to stop drivers from running those red lights.
Okay. Chair Henderson, this is Kanti. If I could just provide an overarching set of thoughts and a status on where we as staff are. We've started looking at all of these ideas, all of the 6 with the sub-bullets on this slide, slide 5. And we believe that these are all things that we as staff could look at and undertake within the resources we have. So we take this as a general direction to start looking at, as Drew was mentioning, how exactly can this body be effective and helpful in helping our member jurisdictions take action on it. On the idea of working with COG, I have followed up after this summit and had a detailed discussion with COG's executive director on what might the pathway look like to do that. And to Mr. Snyder's point, and as has been noted on the slide, they have identified that they would really like for any legislative action to take place, they would need data and some sort of a white paper to help craft a bill. So I have committed that within the TPB will be able to do that piece of work for collect the data, effectiveness, what strategies, and help put that. So that is one thing that we can do. The second thing is we have already talked with COG. COG convenes on a monthly basis a committee of all the police officers in the region. So there's an opportunity to work with them because one of the things that came out in this summit is the data that is gathered on the accident reports is not consistent throughout the region. So is there an opportunity to make sure that at least all of these reports have some basic information that would help us craft some interventions? So that is one that we've talked about. And at the summit, we heard the new approach from the federal agencies on what they are calling safe systems approach. And one of the elements there are 5 elements in it, and one of the elements is post-crash care. Medical attention that is made available at the scene and to the people involved. So COG once again convenes the health directors and EMS personnel on a monthly basis. So there's an opportunity for us to reach out to them to see how what opportunities there might be to enhance any coordination and improve the post-crash care system. So we've started putting things together, and we'll be happy to bring back to the board on an ongoing basis any progress on any of these items that we're working on. Thanks.
Madam Chair, I have a comment. Maria Siener with VDOT. One of the items that we spoke at the summit as well was driver behavior. And granted that could fall under the item that Kanti was just talking about, item 3, there is also the component of working with the DMVs and as far as the driver capacity to operate vehicles. And there was some discussion about maybe working on more education, or more training, or something more impactful like, and again, that would require maybe some legislation, such as tying it to the license, and that was briefly discussed at the summit as well, but I don't know if it's identified in those recommendations.
We are happy to include that as one of the strategies. Yes, there was discussion about retesting after X number of years for those who currently hold license to periodically retest them as well. So.
To probably education, and maybe could be fitted under, I don't know, maybe systemic approach of preventive measures or under item 3 as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're gonna move on to the next item. Well, it's actually our last item, which is the Community Advisory Committee recruitment, which is underway for the next cohort. Laura Bockel on staff will report on the staff efforts for recruitment, and we will be asked to nominate a new cohort of folks in January. Laura?
Thank you. So I'm Laura Beckel. I'm your Public Involvement Specialist. Thanks, Madam Chair and board members. Just wanted to go over where we're at with applications received so far for the Community Advisory Committee next cohort. The application period is actually going to close really soon, December 2nd, which is not that many days. So I'm glad I'm speaking with you now. And of course, we've been doing recruitment through advertisements, word of mouth, everything else we can think of to get the word out about this. We are now up to 49 completed applications, so that's good news. We've heard from 11 TPB member jurisdictions, and 38 applications are from people who have not previously applied, so all good news. So on the targets, happy to update these two. As you remember, the membership is 24 people. There's 5 from each jurisdiction, and then 9 are at large. So right now we have DC 15 applications, Maryland 18 applications, and Virginia at 15. And current members reapplying 11, which is good news. So next steps, we're going to be vetting those after we get the close on December 2nd. And then we're going to be applying some criteria to those applications. And you can see the criteria here. It's the same as we've always used in the past. And then the board will be asked to approve or make changes and then approve the nominations for the next cohort. And the CAC chair, after approval, will be selected by the incoming TPB chair. And the first meeting will take place on February 13th. So in terms of getting the word out, we're doing really well in a lot of the counties. The outer counties, not so great. So Charles County, Frederick, would love to see some more applications there. And also the cities. Would love to see some more applications from our city members. So that's it for me. Any questions?
Anyone have any questions for Laura? All right, Laura, can you just repeat what the deadline is?
Oh, December 2nd.
Okay, so if anyone knows folks who might want to serve or might be a good pick for the CAC, please promote this opportunity and help them get their applications in on time. All righty. Well, with that, folks, we moved way faster than I anticipated, or I think even Kanti anticipated here. But our meeting is adjourned. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, December 18th, 2024. That will be our last meeting of the calendar year. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.